Hello class. I love unique and rarely seen Pokemon, and if you clicked on this video, I'm guessing you do too. So in this lecture, we'll be discussing how to determine if a Pokemon is competitively viable or not. First, let me clarify what I mean by competitively viable. When I say a Pokemon is competitively viable, I mean, is there at least one team that can effectively use that Pokemon at the highest level of play? It also means that on that team, that Pokemon is actually the best option for that slot. With enough time, an extremely strong player could probably get to top 10 on the ladder with a Lampent, but that does not mean Lampent is worth using at a top level. Many Pokemon would certainly be better in that team slot. So when I say a Pokemon isn't competitively viable, I'm saying that there is no justifiable competitive purpose to use that Pokemon at a top level. I'm not saying that Pokemon is bad, I'm not saying it can't ever work, I'm just saying that it cannot reasonably be justified at a top level. So, with some Pokemon, it's obvious that they're viable. In singles, Pokemon are sorted into tiers by usage, with the main format overused at the top and zero used at the bottom. So, obviously, every Pokemon in Overused is viable in Overused. That's why they're in the tier in the first place. It gets enough usage to remain in that tier. So, if your favorite Pokemon is a major metagame staple, congratulations, it's definitely viable. And there are some Pokemon that are obviously unviable, such as unevolved Pokemon like Marshtomp. This guy has no place in Overused. What we'll be focusing on in this video is how to determine overused viability of Pokemon from lower tiers, but the methods I go over will apply to almost all singles and doubles formats. If you want to determine if a Pokemon is viable or not, or you want to know how you can find underrated Pokemon, this is the video for you. Now, one major misconception about viability that I want to correct right off the bat is the idea that how viable a Pokemon is in Overused directly depends on how far it is from Overused. So, underused Pokemon are probably viable, rarely used Pokemon are sometimes viable, never used Pokemon are very rarely viable, and anything below that should really never appear in Overused. This is completely wrong. There is definitely a correlation, but there are many Pokemon in Underused that are not viable in Overused, and there are many Pokemon in Zero Used that are viable in Overused. So what makes those Zero Used Pokemon work, and those Underused Pokemon not work? Well, of course, in a game as complicated as competitive Pokemon, there is no simple or easy method, but there are things we can watch for that indicate a Pokemon may be underrated. I'm going to go over all the major indicators that a Pokemon is viable, as well as major indicators that it isn't viable. Let's start on a positive note with the indicators that a Pokemon is viable. Most of the Pokemon I discover that are a lot better than people think have at least one of the following four things. They counter one or more top-tier threats, they have a rare and powerful ability, they have a rare and powerful move, and/or they are an extremely potent breaker that the tier is unprepared for. Let's go over some examples of Pokemon that have been elevated by these, starting with the Pokemon that are counters to top tiers. One that I recently tried out is Umbreon. Umbreon is in the rarely used tier, but I believed it was viable and overused, and when I tried it out, it performed amazing. Umbreon is a very solid answer to many overused threats. It has solid HP and physical defense, and Foul Play, a move that deals damage based on your opponent's attack stat. This makes it great against a lot of setup sweepers. It completely shuts down Dragonite, one-hit KOs Ogerpon Wellspring at +2, and one-hit KOs Ceruledge. It also has the ability Synchronize, which means if it gets inflicted with a status condition, the opposing Pokemon also receives that status condition. This makes it a rock-solid switch-in to Will-O-Wisp Dragapult, and it's also pretty nice to switch into Darkrai, knowing that if you get poisoned by a Sludge Bomb, Darkrai is put on a timer, and unlike Umbreon, it can't heal. Having a very strong matchup into so many top tiers makes Umbreon viable. Tinkaton is another example. It's in the underused tier, and it's viable because its Fairy and Steel typing is amazing against Darkrai, and its Mold Breaker ability allows it to set hazards against Magic Bounce Hatterene and use Thunder Wave and Encore against Gholdengo, which is normally immune due to Good as Gold. Toxicroak is another example. It's in the zero use tier, but it's seen on rain teams because it's great against Ogerpon Wellspring, Kingambit, and Zamazenta, all of which are extremely high usage Pokemon. Even if a Pokemon seems to have few desirable traits in a vacuum, there is no vacuum in competitive Pokemon. If a Pokemon shuts down top tiers, it probably has a place in the metagame. It should also be noted that this almost always occurs with defensive Pokemon. Offensive Pokemon sometimes happen to be really great counters to top tiers, but it's much less common. Moving on to the next indicator of viability, a rare and powerful ability. Sableye, a zero-used Pokemon, has the ability Prankster, which gives +1 priority to status moves. This ability is, thankfully, not given to many Pokemon. Now, Sableye has a horrific 380 base stat total, but with Prankster, it's a menace and overused. Prankster Encore can lock Pokemon into setup moves, Prankster Will-O-Wisp can cripple physical attackers before they have the chance to hit it, and Prankster Recover ensures that even if Sableye ends up at very low health, it can outspeed and heal up. Sableye also fits the previous category of countering top tiers. In particular, it completely shuts down Dragonite and Zamazenta. Other Pokemon I'd include in this category, one is Bruxish, which is in PU. Its ability Dazzling blocks priority, which is incredibly valuable in the overused metagame that is infested with powerful priority moves. A player named Kafkafoon recently hit rank 35 on the ladder with a Bruxish Rain team. I'm on the fence as to whether Bruxish is viable or not, but Dazzling undoubtedly gives it a chance. Pincurchin, a zero-used Pokemon, is another great example, as the only Pokemon in the game with Electric Surge. It can enable some insanely powerful Cork Drive Pokemon in overused. Like with Bruxish, I'm on the fence about Pincurchin's viability, but its ability does certainly give it a place on some very threatening teams. Now for the next indicator of viability, a rare and powerful move. Glare is an example that immediately comes to mind, and Dunsparce, which is in the never used tier, uses Glare very well. Only 5 fully evolved Pokemon learn this move, excluding Smeargle. It's one of the best moves in the game, a paralyzing move that's 100 accuracy and even paralyzes ground types. This is a major part of what makes the Dunsparce leads legitimately threatening. It can set Stealth Rock and has the powerful stab of Boom Burst, but there are a ton of hazard leads out there. There's a lot of competition. What really makes the Dunsparce worth using is Glare. Being able to paralyze your opponent at the start of the game is incredible, and if you get lucky, it might lead to the Dunsparce not just setting up hazards, but also getting a kill, maybe even paralyzing more than one Pokemon. Another example of this rare and powerful move is Low Kicks, which is an underused. Low Kicks is well known to be viable and overused today, but for years it had almost zero usage. First Impression was what made Low Kicks great. Only 6 fully evolved Pokemon learn this move, they're not just handing it out. Low Kicks also had the rare and powerful ability of Tinted Lens to help it out, making that bug move that's almost always not very effective turn into neutral effective. Minior, which is in zero used, is another cool example. It gets Shell Smash, arguably the best setup move in the game. Without this, it would be absolutely garbage, but with Shell Smash, it can be an extremely threatening sweeper. Now the last major indicator that a Pokemon is viable, it's an extremely potent breaker. Hisuian Arcanine, which is in the underused tier, is a great example of this. It's a fire and rock type with the ability Rockhead, so it won't take any recoil damage as it spams Flare Blitz and Head Smash, stab 120 and 150 base power moves respectively. Not only is it powerful on paper, but because of its low usage, the overused tier just isn't prepared for this level of power from these types. There are no commonly seen rock-type breakers in overused, and the strongest physical fire types are Ceruledge and Cinderace. Ceruledge needs to set up to approach Arcanine's power level, and Cinderace doesn't even come close, so many teams aren't ready for a choice-banned Flare Blitz from Arcanine Hisui. Often the most effective breakers actually come from lower tiers because teams in that higher tier aren't prepared for that Pokemon. That doesn't necessarily make them better Pokemon overall. An overused breaker like Ogerpon Wellspring certainly will encounter more resistance than Hisuian Arcanine. People will be more ready for it, but it also has the benefit of better defensive utility, thanks to its typing and water absorb, higher speed, and other factors. It's overused for a reason. But when it comes to raw breaking power, there are many low tiers more powerful than anything in overused. Porygon Z from the rarely used tier is another insanely powerful breaker. Its ability Download gives a special attack boost if the opponent has a lower special defense stat than defense. Pair this with a Choice Specs and Porygon Z is reaching 910 special attack. Even without stab, its Ice Beam is stronger than Curem's. Manaphy from the underused tier is another great example. Tail Glow boosts Manaphy's special attack by 3 stages, giving it enough power to shatter almost any team. This is also an example of a rare and powerful move, helping this Pokemon be viable. A lot of viable lower tiers have more than one of these indicators. Alright, so the indicators that a Pokemon is viable is that it counters top tiers, has a rare and powerful ability, a rare and powerful move, and or is an extremely powerful breaker. The more of these indicators a Pokemon has, the better chance it's viable. So, if you're searching for underrated Pokemon, try and find Pokemon that meet these indicators. Showdown has a lot of helpful tools to filter Pokemon. You can search for a powerful ability or a powerful move and see which Pokemon get it. You can filter for attack or special attack stats and see what the strongest Pokemon are. If there's a type combo that seems amazing against a certain top tier threat, search that type combo and see what comes up. Alright, now let's go over the indicators that a Pokemon isn't viable. Why might your favorite Pokemon not make the cut in the big leagues? Well, there are 5 major reasons. It's outclassed, meaning that something does its job better. It has a bad matchup into major metagame staples. It has a terrible typing, a bad move pool, and or its stats are awful. Starting with Outclassed, this is by far the most common reason that lower tier Pokemon are unviable. One example of this is Vaporeon, which is in Never Used. A lot of people love Eevee evolutions, and I've seen many try to make this Pokemon work in Overused. But what does Vaporeon do? What does it offer? Well, there are 3 things it does pretty well. The first is Passing Wish, a healing move that heals on the turn after it's used. It has 130 HP, which is very high, so it can heal other Pokemon up a lot more than 50% if it switches or pivots out. And that's the next thing it's good at, pivoting. It gets Flip Turn and it's quite slow, so it can often tank a hit, use Flip Turn to switch out, and bring in something else safely. The last thing it's good at is spreading burns with Scald. This move isn't super commonly distributed like it was in past generations, so teams are a lot less prepared for it than they used to be. Here's the issue though. Alomomola isn't overused, and it does everything Vaporeon does better. It has a higher HP stat, so its wishes heal more. It has Regenerator, which heals it upon switching out, so it can click Flip Turn way more often than Vaporeon without having to heal. And Alomomola also gets Scald. So there's just no reason to use Vaporeon. This is an extreme example. It isn't always this clear-cut. Haxorus from the underused tier is also outclassed. It can set up with Swords Dance and Dragon Dance and often uses Scale Shot. This can be done by Garchomp. Dragonite doesn't get Swords Dance, but it does get Dragon Dance and can also function quite similarly. One might argue that Haxorus has unique benefits. Its ability Mold Breaker allows it to threaten stall teams since it can break past Dondozo, which Dragonite and Garchomp can't do. And while this is true, it's not enough. In at least 90% of games, if you use Haxorus, you'll be wishing you had a Garchomp or Dragonite instead. Both Dragonite and Garchomp function similarly to Haxorus, but have way better defensive stats and other benefits like dual typings and moves that Haxorus dearly wishes it had. Espeon from Never Used is also outclassed. Magic Bounce is an amazing ability, but Hatterene is right there, and unlike Espeon, it doesn't die to a light breeze. As I said, this is the most common reason a Pokemon is unviable. It's also the most difficult for less experienced players to spot, because an outclassed Pokemon isn't necessarily even bad. Something like Haxorus might work well and sweep some games, leading the player to think Haxorus is viable. So before you sink too much time into developing and refining a team with a low-tier option, try substituting it for a more powerful Pokemon that has a similar role, and see if it's just instantly way better. If so, the Pokemon you thought was underrated is probably just outclassed. Now for the next indicator, bad matchup into major metagame staples. If you're a low tier that's awful against Great Tusk, which has a 35% usage in Overused, that's probably game over for your shot at being viable. At least if you're an offensive Pokemon. Defensive low tiers don't much care if they lose to common Pokemon like Great Tusk as long as they answer the Pokemon they're supposed to, but if the low tier you want to use is a sweeper, breaker, or other offensive role that gets shut down by super common Pokemon, that's a huge issue. Kleavor, a rarely used Pokemon, is a particularly tragic case. Its signature move Stone Axe is amazing, setting Stealth Rock while attacking and bypassing Magic Bounce. But the most common removal Pokemon in the tier, Great Tusk, also is an incredible switch into Kleavor. Kleavor is also terrible against the second most common Pokemon in the tier, Goldenko. On paper, Kleavor has a lot of desirable traits, but when you're awful against the Pokemon with 35% usage and 25% usage, you're not in good shape. Toxtricity from the rarely used tier is another example. It has the ability Punk Rock to boost the power of sound moves, and the most powerful sound move in the game, Boom Burst. With Terra Normal and Choice specs, it's insanely powerful, nearly 2-hit KOing Blissey. But of course, Ghost types are immune, and as I just said, Gholdengo is very common. Then there's also Ting-Lu, which is immune to one of Toxtricity's stabs and resists the other, and it can tank a Boom Burst. It's one of the best special walls ever. And then there's Iron Treads, which is immune to both of Toxtricity's stabs and resists Boom Burst. So it's just not worth using this Pokemon. There are too many common counters in the tier. Breloom, another rarely used Pokemon, is in this position as well. Gholdengo and Dragonite, the second and fourth most used Pokemon respectively, completely shut it down. So if you're using Breloom, I hope you like doing almost nothing in half of your games. Alright, let's move on to the next indicator, terrible typing. A bad typing is enough to absolutely kill an otherwise promising Pokemon. Glastrier, a Pokemon with incredible bulk and a high 580 base stat total, is a mono ice type. It's in the 0 used tier because of that, and its terrible speed. If it was any other type, I could see it overcoming its poor speed, but slow and a mono ice type, it's not going to work. Frostmoth, a PU Pokemon, is a bug and ice type. Its ability Ice Scales is insane, doubling special defense, and it gets Quiver Dance, one of the best setup moves in the game. But since it struggles to hit so many common types, and it's devastatingly weak to Steel and Fire, it's probably not viable. Lycanroc Midnight, which is 0 used, is a mono rock type and suffers badly from it. Despite having access to No Guard, an ability that makes you unable to miss, and Stone Edge, the lack of another offensive stab makes it unusable. Now for the next indicator, bad move pool. Some Pokemon just don't have the moves they need to succeed. Inteleon from Never Used seems like it has a lot going for it. Sniper is a threatening ability, and it has a great base 120 speed and 125 special attack. But it doesn't get focus energy, so it has no way to consistently utilize Sniper. In fact, it has no way of boosting its special attack at all. Nasty Plot would also be a major win, but it doesn't get it. It doesn't even get Calm Mind. Some better coverage options would be nice as well. Hurricane would be great for hitting hard when it's used on rain teams, but as you could probably guess, it doesn't get that either. Swalot from 0 used is also ruined by its move pool. It has the ability Sticky Hold, preventing its item from being removed, which makes it a potentially amazing knockoff absorber, and Mono Poison is actually a great defensive typing, but it has no recovery move. Thus end the hopes and dreams of Swalot. Florges from the PU tier is insanely specially bulky and has a solid base 112 special attack. It could be a special wall and a Calm Mind sweeper, but it really only learns grass and fairy moves, so it has no way of dealing with steel types. Something like Earth Power or Burning Jealousy would be fantastic, but it doesn't get it. Lack of setup moves, lack of recovery, and lack of coverage are the big 3 areas where Pokemon really feel their bad move pool. A single move can be the difference between a viable and unviable Pokemon. Now for the last major indicator of being unviable, just having bad stats. Some Pokemon have almost everything going for them, but if they don't have the base stats to back it up, they're not going to be viable. Bombirdier, a PU Pokemon, comes to mind. It has so much going for it. Flying in Dark is an amazing defensive typing. It has recovery with Roost, and great moves like Knock Off, Parting Shot, Stealth Rock, Brave Bird. It also has an incredible ability, Rocky Payload, which essentially gives it a third stab with rock moves. This Pokemon is really set up for success until you see its stats. Nothing horrible, but just not nearly enough. Not fast enough to outspeed major threats and use Parting Shot, not strong enough to get a lot of KOs, and not bulky enough to be an effective wall. Grafaiai is a more extreme case. Once again, a lot going for it. Poison Normal is a pretty solid defensive type, and like Sableye, it gets Prankster Encore. It also gets Prankster Parting Shot, which is amazing. But as you can see by its stats, a strong wind is enough to KO it. It's too much for Grafaiai to get past. Poor Squawkabilly has also been killed by its stats. With great abilities like Intimidate, Hustle, and Guts, and normal flying typing to take advantage of these abilities pretty well, this Pokemon could be a very real threat. That is, if a 96 based attack wasn't its crowning achievement. You get the idea. Some Pokemon can overcome terrible stats if they have a lot going for them otherwise, but in almost every case, awful stats is the end of the road. It should also be noted that you should focus on stat distribution more than base stat total. Having a ton of attack and special attack at once is often not great, since you'll probably only use one of those stats. An offensive Pokemon having a super high special defense stat often isn't that useful either. More min-maxed Pokemon also tend to be better. So just keep in mind that when you're looking for bad stats, although a really low base stat total is a bad sign, the distribution matters more than the total. So the main reasons a Pokemon is unviable is that it's outclassed, has a bad matchup into metagame staples, terrible typing, bad move pool, and/or awful stats. Note that these lists are not exhaustive. They're simply the most common reasons I see that I end up concluding a Pokemon is viable or unviable. Regigigas, though, doesn't have any of these bad indicators. Its ability Slow Start is what murdered it, so there are some cases that fall outside of these indicators. Determining if a Pokemon is viable or not can save you a lot of time. I love trying to make unique and rarely seen Pokemon work at a top level, but if I sank time into every idea that crossed my mind, I'd go down tons of dead ends. So if you see a Pokemon that has none of the positive indicators and a few negative indicators, it's probably not worthwhile. If a Pokemon has one or more of the positive indicators and not too many of the negative indicators, it probably is worthwhile. If the Pokemon you're building around seems to have a mix of both, the only solution is to test and try it out. Sableye, for example, I really wasn't sure about. It does counter two major top tiers, Dragonite and Zamazenta. It also has a unique and powerful ability, Prankster, but it has absolutely terrible stats. These indicators can help guide you to what Pokemon are worth your time, but the most accurate method of finding out if a Pokemon is viable or not is just trying it on the ladder. Try it on various teams, different archetypes, different sets, and see if anything works. When I tried out Sableye, I was very impressed with its performance, and I concluded that it is probably viable. When I tried out Glaceon, I was not impressed at all, and I concluded that it is almost certainly not viable. I also want to clarify that this video is not supposed to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. If it's fun for you to use Grumpig and Overused for some reason, go for it. You can't justify using Grumpig at a top level for any competitive reason, but for most people, fun is the ultimate purpose of this game. For me though, and for many others, trying to make rarely seen Pokemon work at a top level is the fun. Hopefully you now have a better idea of how to find Pokemon that may be underrated, and the knowledge to rule out bad Pokemon before you spend weeks working with it. And that's it for this lecture. If you're not sure if a Pokemon is viable and overused or not, feel free to ask in the comments section and I'll give you my take on it. Also, let me know, what is your favorite low-tier Pokemon to use and overused? Remember to subscribe, your exam is coming up soon and you don't want to miss future lessons. Class dismissed.